Welcome to Tea Garden Talk, which is a lockdown special put on by Garden Masterclass org. It's at 4 o'clock London time, Monday to Friday. Our normal business is putting on day workshops led by garden and landscape experts across the British Isles, and we're trying to organise in the Netherlands with occasional events in Germany and France. We're also now putting on pay-to-view webinars, which we're organising on a month-to-month basis. We do a regular newsletter, which at the moment we're bringing out every few weeks because of the rapidly changing situation. If you'd like to get our newsletter, please send us an email on gardenmasterclass@gmail.org, and that will stay very strictly with us. Tea Garden Talk itself is put on as a free service during lockdown, but we really appreciate donations to cover our running costs and time. If you'd like to donate, please go to the online page of our website. Thank you. Garden Masterclass and Tea Garden Talk are run by Annie Guilfoyle, who's based in Sussex in southern England, and Noel Kingsbury, based in central Portugal. So we look forward to seeing you and one day, hopefully, to meet you. So I think we should introduce our guest today. Now, in terms of geographical overrepresentation, we're going back to the state of Pennsylvania, which seems to have a real pull for us. We seem to have a Pennsylvania-themed event more or less once a week. Now, I've been invited a few times to speak by the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, who are based in the city of Brotherly Love in Philadelphia. And I've been around the city a couple of times with PHS folk, and very much admired their, what is for me a very interesting and progressive model of engagement between the horticulture community and the wider population of the city. So it's great to have the president of PHS, Matt Radar, here today to talk to us about what the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society is. So I think over to you, Matt, for perhaps a bit of history first and an explanation of who you are.
Sure. Thank you very much, Noel, for inviting. It's good to be with you all. I've loved watching some of these talks, and I'm excited to tell you a bit about PHS. So PHS is an old organization founded 1827 in Philadelphia, and much like many horticultural organizations, sort of had its roots in people wanting to up the level of horticulture plantsmanship in this city, and also to compare notes, compete, etc. But what we've really become largely since the 1970s has been an organization focused on promoting horticulture as a way to deliver positive impact in society and on the environment. So really looking at opportunities to help gardeners actually adopt practices, activities, work together in community, to do things with horticulture that really solve some of the pressing social issues in this region. And for those of you that don't know Philadelphia well, we're a large city, the 5th or 6th largest metropolitan area in the US, but we're a city with the highest poverty rate of any big city in America. Lots of issues around incarcerated population and challenges returning to the community. A third of the people in the core city struggling with food security, et cetera. So many urban issues that are common to a lot of legacy cities in the US. And for PHS, since the early 70s, we've really been focused on trying to use horticulture and the masses of people associated with horticulture. More than 70% of US households do something with a garden or lawn, as a way of trying to put a dent in those issues. So can talk more about things as we roll, but we have a large program that works in 250 neighborhoods to partner with community groups to do positive things with horticulture. We have a home gardener facing education and engagement program. We run the United States' largest flower show, which is the Philadelphia Flower Show. And we also operate a network of free public gardens and landscapes in the city and around the region. all supported through largely charitable support and to some extent government. So I can, Noel, do you want me to sort of dig further into programs?
Well, I think, just wondering whether you needed to screen share at any point.
Oh yeah, let me share a couple of pictures.
Yeah.
Sorry, catching up. This is going to be me learning how to do this. I've been on many Zoom calls, but not so much on screen sharing.
Aha, right.
Take this, have the slideshow view.
Great.
These things are very easy to do until you're doing them in front of 200 people. Okay, you all can see these images.
Yeah. Yes.
So, as I said, we're based in Philadelphia, and for us, compared to a public garden, we really look at the whole region as the garden we're caring for and trying to figure out how to use horticulture for benefit. And this is our region. This is not our site, but
PHS. Totally fascinating place, this.
It is. So this is Bartram's Garden, which is in Southwest Philadelphia. And the reason I put this up is when Noel and Annie and I were talking, Philadelphia is very much a center for horticulture in the U.S. Not the only center, but a very large center with more than 30 public gardens, a number of really significant higher education programs around horticulture. We have an agriculture high school, just the whole array of activities. And there's a bit of a chicken and egg as to sort of, is PHS the source or is Philadelphia the source? And I think it's a mutually thriving environment. And I share the picture of Bartram's because Philadelphia has these incredibly deep roots starting in the early 1700s around plant exploration and botany and trading plants with particularly England, but also other places in Europe. And so John Bartram, whose home and garden this was the king's botanist in the 18th century in North America, and really was sort of a hub of exploring plants, collecting plants, and trading plants with Europe. And Philadelphia's kind of horticulture legacy kind of starts there and has grown and grown and grown through the work of a number of horticulturists and philanthropists over many years. This is a graphic just to show. So today we brand Philadelphia as America's garden capital. And we have more than 30 public gardens that are within 30 miles of the core of the city. Some of them well known, like Chanticleer or Longwood Gardens, some lesser known, some free, some paid. But across this network of gardens, you have hundreds, if not thousands, of horticultural experts. You have amazing plant collections from trees to every other dimension. You have just incredible experiences and education available to people in horticulture. And PHS is not so much place-based as it is working with the people, the gardeners, the gardens, the audiences that support all of this work year in, year out, and trying to mobilize that for not just horticultural excellence, but also social and environmental impact. And in the last 2 years, we've tightened our focus even more to really say that what we're trying to do is to use horticulture as a means to address human health, and specifically 4 drivers of health. One is people's connection to one another, social connections. The second is access to fresh food. The third is healthy living environments. And the fourth is access to jobs and economic opportunity. So we believe that horticulture is a tool that can be used to advance those 4 things. And if they're advanced, we end up with a higher level of health in this region and beyond.
That's very interesting. I mean, I think it's because, your first, or at least my first reaction on meeting PHS a few years ago was you kind of automatically relate it to what you know already, which of course is Britain's Royal Horticultural Society. And then you sort of gradually realize they are very, very different beasts. And so just wondering when this change occurred from, a horticultural society with a body of some quite a venerable body. I mean, that wonderful library you have with some fabulous old books. I mean, a really good sense of heritage there. And you sounds as if PHS has gone through a phase of actually then becoming this, really outward-looking social action organisation. I was just wondering when that happened and how easy that was, if it was contested, the sort of social processes behind that.
Yes, and let me share some images here to accompany this. So, and switch back to the slideshow. So this change really started in the 1970s. So, this is our centennial history published in 1927. You don't get much more traditional blue blood, et cetera, than this wonderful image.
Yes.
Through the 20th century, the PHS made a couple of evolutions. So in the 1800s, very much an elitist or elite horticultural society for people pursuing horticultural interest. In the 20th century, around the time this book was written, a pivot first to being the domain of nurserymen and seed companies. Philadelphia was very much a hub of seed production and distribution, and those companies found PHS to be a useful meeting ground and promotion ground. And then also later on shifting to amateurs, so starting to reach out to garden clubs, volunteer plant societies, et cetera, across the region. But still remaining very much like a great club for gardeners, an incredible library, good educational programs, a quality magazine, et cetera, and small. And then you sort of find yourself in the early 1970s, which is where this pivot really came for PHS. So this was Philadelphia and many other cities in the early 1970s. It was an industrial city facing the early stages of decline, challenges with air and water pollution, social issues, race issues, etc. And this is the sort of normal neighborhood building stock of Philadelphia. We're very much a city of row houses, 2 and 3 stories, much like Manchester or other industrial cities of this age. And yet, Philadelphia in the 1970s was also a place where there was some really proactive and creative thinking about how to redevelop cities into higher quality places to live. And this particular project is Society Hill, which was a wholesale redevelopment and redesign of one of the oldest parts of the city that had been first developed in the late 1600s. It used a lot of really modern principles around greenways and integrated public spaces and greening and gardening and all of the things that became familiar to us. And so it's a city where you had both these really entrenched social and environmental challenges, and you also had some agitation around new ideas about regenerative urbanism, regenerative landscape, et cetera. So the woman on the right side of the picture here is Ernesto Mallard. And she became president of PHS in the early 1970s. And if you read her writing, she really saw this opportunity to take the social capital that had been built up in PHS, right? This was an elite organization. And the financial capital, PHS had built the flower show into a good, profitable entity by the early 70s, and put that to work to do something to try to help address the city's challenges. And she led that change. And it was complicated, and it was complicated for the next 40 years, including to today. And I can talk a bit about that. Because you were mixing things that felt very different, right? One is a club sort of serving my needs in horticultural excellence, and the other is an organization trying to be of help and support and assistance to people and neighborhoods and places that might be far from the traditional membership. And so this effort grew and grew through some early neighborhood outreach work and a big program called Philadelphia Green that really focused on trying to distribute plants and materials and expertise to people in neighborhoods facing social challenges to make positive change. It evolved into some large-scale civic beautification projects. So this is an intersection near the Philadelphia airport that PHS organized property owners raised money and turned into sort of a garden greenway gateway to the city. And this work just kind of grew and grew over time. This is sort of a fun graphic that takes you from 1682 to the early 90s in 5 seconds or less. But this was kind of an unresolved tension really until the last couple of years. So I came to PHS in 2016, and when I arrived, the Philadelphia Flower Show, which draws 250,000 people, largest show in the US and largest indoor show in the world, was viewed as its own thing and a fundraiser, a big fundraiser, but very much a thing. And then over here, we had our neighborhood programs that served the community. And then we had our public landscapes that we cared for around the city, and Meadowbrook Farm, which was our public garden. And then we had our library and we had our membership. But the pieces didn't necessarily really fit together. All the pieces were beloved to some part of the audience, but it was very hard to say why this organization was important and what are we doing. And so we had a very in-depth process of sort of soul searching and talking and thinking, and came to this idea that we could use all those tools, the flower show, our outreach and engagement of home gardeners, our work in neighborhoods, and our public gardens and landscapes to, in different ways, accomplish one purpose, which was causing people to adopt practices and use horticulture to address health and well-being, to really focus on health. And to do that by focusing on connecting people to each other, creating access to fresh food, improving the living environments where we all physically live, and creating jobs and economic opportunity. So now we're in this moment where we're re-envisioning. So we're saying, how could we use the flower show to not only be an amazing event, but to actually select the garden designers and horticulturists who are most pushing thinking forward on social impact of horticulture, and feature them in the flower show and have them win gold, so that they are then using the flower show to become promoted as horticultural thinkers who are aligned with our thinking. We're also looking at our public gardens and landscapes and shifting to all organic management practices, which we've done for a while, but now growing food as ornamental and trying to cause people to go into these landscapes that they saw as just kind of beautiful urban moments, and really start to see them as ecosystems and engage with the plants, et cetera. So it's an activation of all these tools together. And then finally, we're looking at home gardeners and saying, how can we not just educate, but actually turn home gardeners into a collective impact machine? So if all the gardeners, we reach 400,000 people a year. If all of those people bought plants from suppliers who were focused on livable wages and environmentally friendly growing practices and plant biodiversity, that could make a significant impact in what happens in the supply chain. Or if that whole community of gardeners committed to growing additional areas of food, that could really have an impact on food supply, et cetera.
Right. So you've described as the general sort of direction of PHS, and obviously the flower show, as you say, is a kind of flagship known throughout the United States, if not the world. In terms of actually concretely what PH does, I was wondering if you could talk us through some of the actual programs that you run.
Absolutely. So I'm going to keep the screen going. So a couple big buckets. So work in neighborhoods, the flower show, public gardens and landscapes, and home gardeners. So we'll just work through them. So on the neighborhood side, we do a variety of programs that really aim at organizing and supporting people in neighborhoods to undertake horticultural projects that advance health and well-being. So one of the backbones is community gardening. So for those of you who are not in the US, allotment gardening only exists to the extent that it's undertaken by charitable entities. It's not really seen as a public service. So we have a network of 250 community gardens, which are very much like allotment gardens here, that we support. We have a land trust affiliate that secures and owns land. We provide education. We have neighborhood greenhouses where we grow seedlings. We do education. We help people organize and fundraise, etc. This is one of the sites owned by the land trust where we preserve it, stabilize the infrastructure, etc. We have a large tree planting program that works in almost 200 neighborhoods where we train people to be tree tenders, which is a certified volunteer program. It's a 9-hour training, and it's sort of basics of arboriculture and also community organizing. And once there are 3 tree tenders in a given neighborhood, we will help them organize as a tree tender group. And then we support them through an annual cycle of work. 2 big planting campaigns, one in the spring and one in the fall. Pruning clubs, which do early stage pruning and care of trees, and advocacy, where they go and knock on doors of people who have accepted trees and get them to water and care for the tree, etc. So it's very much a neighborhood network that's supported in a collaborative way across the city. And we're doing online tree tenders for the first time because of COVID. We've got 135 people in this course, and they're as far away as Chicago and Colorado and beyond. So hopefully the tree tenders bug will spread. Another tree planting project here. We have a large vacant land cleaning and greening program. So Philadelphia, like most cities that experienced some level of deindustrialization, has a lot of vacant land, something like 30,000 lots around the city, and they're not maintained. So this is sort of an extreme condition, but imagine living across the street from this every day. And so we have a program that does, this is the same lot, a pretty straightforward intervention, which is to clean the lot, to degrade it and plant grass, to plant trees, and then to put up these very simple post and rail fences, and then to maintain them twice a month through the growing season. So we have 12,000 lots in this program today across the city, which is about 1/3 of the total. And these sites become, at the very least, they become neutral community assets, right? Imagine moving from this to this. These become community gathering spaces, which is allowed. And we've done a lot of public health research with University of Pennsylvania and Columbia University, which has shown through randomized control trial that this intervention has reduced violent crime by almost 30%, reduced feelings of worthlessness and depression by almost 70%. So really transformative impact. And we also use the work of maintaining these lots as sort of a safe haven for small businesses in the neighborhood to learn how to be landscape contractors and scale up their business, and also as first step employment for people returning from incarceration. So this program creates about 300 jobs a year. Of them, 60 to 70 are people who are returning from prison, and the vast majority are persons of color and people from the neighborhood. We also do other work in job training, both within the Philadelphia prison complex, where we run a program in partnership with Temple University that trains people in basic landscaping skills, and then also places them in paid job training after release, and then first step jobs. And this is a group of our staff and trainees working on a landscape in Philadelphia. And these are the graduates of the program with the Mayor of Philadelphia and City Council President. We talked about that. Moving on to public gardens and landscapes, we have a network of about 15 gardens around Philadelphia and the vicinity that we maintain and operate for the public, many in partnership with other nonprofits. So this, for example, is the Rodin Museum, which is operated by the Philadelphia Museum of Art. But we operate the garden. We bring some of the money, they bring some of the money, but we bring horticultural expertise. And so this garden is offered free to the public. And as you can see, when it's not COVID time, is well used. We have Meadowbrook Farm, which is one of our own gardens, which is a kind of a fantastic mid-century, just all the senses activated kind of show garden. The Azalea Garden, which is another garden that we created and maintain for free in the public park system. Street planters around the city. And then improvements in public parks. So there's not much horticulture in this picture, but we do overhaul projects in public parks where we do community-informed design and reconstruction of parks to include green amenities and good people amenities as well. One of the things Annie and Noel asked me to touch on are pop-up gardens. So sort of the newest addition to our public gardens and landscapes are these seasonal gardens that we create on vacant land. Not much garden in this picture, but there is in the perimeter. They operate as beer gardens, so food and drink pays the bills. We run really intensive horticultural programming in partnership with a lot of plant societies. So have a beer, learn about orchid care with the Orchid Society, and then figure out how to enter it in the Philadelphia Flower Show to try to recruit people into this world. This is another one of the pop-up gardens that was an apple orchard. We salvaged some heritage apple trees that were going to be disposed of and created this on vacant land. And then this is sort of our flagship pop-up garden, which is now 5 years old. We also do temporary projects. So this was a farm that we built on a granite urban plaza right in the center of Philadelphia for the Bostonian Imagine sort of City Hall Plaza. And we used our flower show capability to just lay core logs in soil. And we grew a vegetable farm that was completely open to the public to interact with farmers and gardeners throughout the day. It giveaways, did educational programs, and all the food that was grown was donated to a homeless services organization. And we had actually surveyed their guests to decide what to grow. So there was this incredible mix of crops from different cultures, and people could both experience the crops as they were growing and then consume the produce.
One little question on that last picture. We've got a query about the edging. I love the edging. What's it made of?
It's called core log. It's a product used a lot in construction sites here to stop. My words are escaping me. But basically, when you're doing construction and disturbing soil, to stop from taking the soil away. So it's a variety of fibers wrapped in basically a wood structure. It's called core log. So in this case, we use it. So our flower show, unlike a UK flower show, we can't dig into the earth. So in this case, you've got 18 inches of soil, more or less, in these beds. And so we used a little flower show magic and started each round of crops for this farm off-site in our greenhouses. And then we turned out 3 crop rotations at this site over the season. So given that it was in public, we wanted it to sort of be interesting and appealing at all times. So we started off-site, brought them here, and then grew them up here on site. So yeah, it was a project of artifice. One of the coolest things, actually, since I'm talking to this group, you can see the sort of fruit crates in the background. Sure. And for display purposes, we were able to grow the next round in fruit crates off-site and then just insert them on this site to continue growing, and it created a really, really neat effect. Lots of examples. This was a project we did with the Woodland Cemetery. That's it's actually a historic garden first, and then became a rural cemetery in the 1840s, and now is a cemetery and public space. And so we helped them form the Grave Gardeners, which is a group of now 100 volunteers who each adopted a grave with a planter, and used our library to study sort of Victorian cemetery planting and plants, and then actually supported them to figure out how to prepare the soil, plant, water, maintain. And it's become quite an interesting project.
Gosh, yeah.
And again, back to this simple idea that this is a horticultural project, but in doing this, we've now built 100 people into a pretty rich community with one another, which has benefits further in the neighborhood. And we've improved this public space as a place for people to be outside. And we've educated a bunch of people about heritage plants and basic gardening practices. So it's trying to do many things with each tool. We also work with kids, a school gardening program, a junior flower show, and then competitions in the Philadelphia show. And with that, I know I can talk about the Philadelphia show, or if you want to.
Yes, I mean, I think we could just sort of stay a little bit on this particular last topic. So really, as I understand it, in a way, I mean, you do many, many things, but one of the things it does seem to be that is almost like the city hall, the city council in Philadelphia have essentially outsourced part of their parks department to yourselves, which I think is a very, very interesting model of how you actually do bring quality and expertise into that whole sector, which certainly in Britain, since with neoliberal economics since Margaret Thatcher, that has been really decimated. And very interesting model. There was a question actually, which I think is one that probably is a worry to quite a few people with anything that involves urban regeneration, which is that would you say that the parks program to help poorer neighborhoods was successful, or did it lead to gentrification and the poorer population then being pushed out? I know these demographic changes are so much a part of city life. And what would your response be to that?
Yeah. So what we do in neighborhoods is done in direct support of community aspirations. So what we don't do is sort of top down, dive in and do something. Take a park over, improve it, and just offer it to the neighborhood. So the tree planting, the community gardening, the vacant land, all begin with neighborhood outreach to find if there is interest and if there's leadership that wants to do it. And then we work to help those people organize at the neighborhood level and support their work. So gentrification is definitely a reality in Philadelphia. And we strive to work in support of community aspiration to try to help make sure that the voices of those who live and work there are really driving what happens.
Yeah. And another question: what happens to the pop-up gardens when they pop back down again?
So both with the vacant land work and the pop-up gardens, these are pretty intentionally temporary uses. So in some cases, we've done multiple seasons. In several cases, the sites have gone on for real estate development. We had borrowed the site or leased it from someone who then developed it. The one that was the orchard is now becoming a new public middle school, as a good example. So either back to vacancy, in some cases into our vacant land program, in some cases to development, in some cases they're still pop-up gardens.
Mm-hmm. And a question from Joe Burns: does PHS get funding from state or municipal sources?
We do. So that for those not in the U.S., the way the voluntary and philanthropic sector plays a very different role in the U.S. than I think in some European environments. For us, the vacant land work, the post and rail fences, grass, trees, is largely supported by city government. And there's marginal support for other activities. But the vast majority of our budget and work is supported through philanthropic support, membership, individual gifts, corporate sponsorship, and the earnings from the pop-up gardens, the Philadelphia Flower Show, and other activities that we do. And I think,
right.
Noel, just to your initial point about sort of outsourcing parks work, it's more organic here and it's hard to describe. So there's sort of the provision that city government makes, right? So the parks that they offer and the level of maintenance they care for. And then there's the voluntary sector saying, hey, there's all these other things that we'd like to do. So people like PHS and the neighborhoods we support organize and do them. And then in some cases, there's overlap, such as us doing improvement of the azalea garden or the rhododendron garden in the park system. But it's not like parks kind of controls it all and then hands some of it out. It's much more of an organic process.
Right. Yeah.
Community gardens, for example, that we support don't have any relationship to parks. That is
right.
Organizing on vacant land. So it's an organic and good relationship, but it's definitely besides our on what should happen.
And a question: do you get much vandalism?
Interestingly, not a lot. So the vacant lots definitely experience short dumping, or I forget the UK word, but people dump construction debris. What'd you say?
Fly tipping.
Fly tipping. That's it. Yes, construction debris, etc. But we maintain them twice a month, and we have sort of intermediate calls if needed. Our public gardens and landscapes, for the most part, are completely in uncontrolled public spaces, and there's modest plant theft, but not to the degree that you would imagine. Pretty flagrant. Like, I've watched people dig plants out of the garden while I'm standing there and say, hey. But really, when something is cared for, the human bias is to respect it. And I think that is what we find. And in the community work, community gardens and trees, people know people who have been part of creating and caring for them. And so there's a social contract that people are loath to violate. So any human relationship where the simple act of caring yields a level of caring in response.
Okay, so I think time to sort of move on perhaps to the flagship, the Philadelphia Flower Show, which I'm afraid I have never been to, although I have been to various of these other flower shows and indeed judged at the Seattle, the Northwest Flower Show in Seattle, and was more or less run out of town when we gave the first prize to the wrong stand. We gave it to a community group, and a couple of landscape design companies who spent enormous sums of money wanted to know why we hadn't given it to them. Anyway, I think we Europeans find these indoor flower shows quite a culture shock. So perhaps if you could give us a little bit of the sort of history of the Philadelphia Flower Show and how it kind of fits into the seasonal calendar, and how you actually literally cope with it being indoors.
Totally. So the Philadelphia Flower Show has its roots in 1829 in a show that would feel more like one of the sort of Vincent Square shows of RHS. Indoor exhibition of plants, people who had grown them in greenhouses, sort of strutting their stuff in terms of what they had been able to grow, technology, resources, etc. And it's had its growth since then. The Philadelphia Flower Show today draws 250,000 people over 9 days. There's about 11 acres of show, all indoor. And it has features that are very common to the UK flower shows, like the show gardens and major landscape exhibits. It also has a much heavier professional floral component, so large-scale floral design and installation. And then we also have a huge non-professional component. So a large individual plant exhibition with several thousand plants, very much harkening back to 1829, that's all competitive. And then similarly on floral design and artistic. So everything from botanical jewelry and pressed plants to interior scapes and windowsills and balconies, etc. So these are just some pictures, and it has, because it's indoor, I think the theatricality has to be pushed up a notch to create spectacle. So lighting, theatrical sets, scale, etc. This was the entrance garden from 2 years ago, which was Wonders of Water, which was very much focused on plants and water as interconnected systems that were necessary for environmental and human health. And this was sort of an immersive rainforest. This was another shot from that show. So this waterfall is, I don't know, 40 feet tall, something like this. This was from this year's show, which was Mediterranean themed. Holland show from a couple years ago, a construction shot there. From the Mediterranean show as well. This is James and Helen Basson's exhibit from this year's show. And then this is the individual plant competition, which we call the Hamilton Horticulture. So it is inside is different. I mean, this week thinking, Monday I was thinking of like the sunny, warm walk down to Chelsea Press Day when it's a beautiful day. And this is different. It's inside, it's in March, which in Philadelphia is 18 degrees and, gray outside. But that reality has actually created some of the show's value. People really see this as a chance to kind of take a quick step into spring and really immerse themselves. And the show has an incredible volunteer base. So because about half the content comes from non-professional, you have this almost 5,000 people who volunteer or exhibit, and they work together all year long. So the people who are exhibiting in the Hamilton Horticulture or the teams that are creating floral design or artistic installations, these are communities of people that stay connected throughout the year. They teach one another, they mentor one another, they embrace new exhibitors. So they really get at that sort of social connections aspect of our social impact priority. And then they're vested in the production of the show. We are looking at also new events. That's one of our growth priorities. So whether probably not other shows that look like this, but looking at youth-driven shows or environmentally focused shows, and probably getting outside. So we will take our lessons from UK shows and others. Right. This is a person entering bulbs. Bulb forcing is one of the best kid activities. We have a whole group of seasoned mentors who work with kids across the region to the entire bulb forcing process: refrigeration, planting, forcing, etc. It's an amazing event. It's also an amazing knowledge transfer among gardener and generation to generation. And it's a huge fundraiser for our neighborhood work.
Great, I can imagine. Yes.
As I said earlier, we're trying. The flower show has a high level of visibility, particularly in the state, and a wide network of horticulture people who are there as part of their tradition. So we are trying to use it increasingly to highlight horticulturists and horticultural ideas that can have positive social and environmental impact, so that the show is a platform and a loudspeaker for this broader cause that we're trying to advance. And this year we changed our judging criteria to start to have environmental components. Annie was part of the judging team this year. We introduced a gardening for biodiversity symposium this year that was part of the show, with Dr. Peter Raven and others speaking to the role that gardeners can play in making choices that help advance biodiversity. etc. So we're really trying to use the show as an activator to try to advance these social and environmental impact priorities.
Great. So I think you're trying to promote Philadelphia very much as America's garden capital. What does that mean?
So in a nutshell, it means that for somebody who's passionate about horticulture, and particularly the plants that thrive in our mid-Atlantic environment, this is a really good place to visit and to study. So really, at the end of the day, we see this network of 30-some public gardens that have grown up around this region as a pretty unique asset. Most parts of the US have at least a handful of great public gardens, but Philadelphia has 30. And they are destinations for people from around the world. So Longwood, Mount Cuba, certainly, world-renowned as research institutions and destinations. Chanticleer, incredible reputation for design and horticultural excellence. And Philadelphians probably are the ones who know the least about these as a global resource. So trying to really present these gardens as an important regional asset, an important regional economic driver, and also just to promote this region as a place that anyone in the US or the world should come if they want to indulge themselves in some horticultural learning and excellence, and try to export that knowledge more broadly as part of the calling card of this region.
Right, and finally, I mean, what's next? Any plans for future developments?
Lots going on. So we talked about this idea that everything is trying to orient around advancing those impact priorities. We talked about the flower show's evolution. COVID has been interesting. So in the COVID world, we have brought most of our in-person programming online, which has immediately opened us to a much broader audience. So we've seen our food growing workshops go from 30 people to 250 people. We've seen tree tenders go from an explicitly local audience to still a regional, but very much a national audience, if not beyond. And so trying to figure out how to live into that and start to make ourselves an organization that can support anyone who cares about horticulture as a social and environmental impact tool to come to PHS and find themselves here and join and be involved. One project we're launching tomorrow actually is called Harvest 2020. And the idea here is Philadelphia's food insecurity problem is expected to double as a result of the economic recession due to COVID. The U.S. is facing almost unprecedented unemployment, and we don't have the same social safety net that you might find in other countries. And we believe that gardeners are actually an untapped source of capacity to grow food, not just for themselves, but for others in need. So we've formed an alliance with the major food banks and food pantries in this region to set up their network of sites where people pick up food to also now receive produce from home gardeners and distribute it to the people that they serve. And then on the gardener side, we're using the flower show marketing engine to actually go out and try to promote to people the idea that if you're looking for something to do in a socially distanced world, growing food and donating it is something that you can do. And then we're using our online educational tools to make it easy. So to overcome the fear factor and try to help people through the basics of where to find the supplies and materials they need, how to plant crops in each season, and build community among the people participating in this. So we're aiming for 100,000 gardeners to make pledges. We're working with all of the public gardens in the region so that they can offer this on to their members as well, and with the goal of producing 100,000 households worth of additional fresh grown produce that makes its way directly into the regional food distribution system. So that's our exciting project right now.
Great, great. Now a couple more questions. A question regarding the tree tender program. Are the volunteers caring and pruning for all street trees, for example, trees neglected by adjacent property owners?
Yes. So we talked about the kind of Parks Department and PHS working in parallel and then together. So in Philadelphia, street trees are actually the property of the Parks Department. And so tree tenders plant them, cause them to be watered, and do early stage pruning in their neighborhoods. Once the trees mature to a place where pruning or care is larger than what a volunteer can handle, they move into the city administration, which happens through network of contractors, et cetera. And as the trees mature, the tree tenders move from kind of direct care to advocacy. So we have a whole citizen science program called Urban Forest Cloud that we developed with the U.S. Forest Service, where tree tenders can track pest and tree conditions and report those. And the tree tenders help be the eyes and ears of the Parks Department for identifying trees that require care, et cetera.
Right, right.
Collaboration.
Mm. Do you have any particular kind of invasive alien problems in the city? I mean, like, you know, tree of heaven, for example, which I know is a problem in some US cities.
We have a lot. Invasive plants from tree to herbaceous, et cetera. We focus on native and non-invasive exotic, and we have worked really hard in the tree program to get the kind of right tree, right place math good, including planting lower growing trees under power lines, working around underground utilities, working with tough urban conditions, et cetera. So trying to be aware of it and be proactive so that once planted and established, the urban trees can survive.
Great, right. And I think it's very much the sort of European feeling is that, the Americans, they're very behind on recycling and biodiversity, whereas I think really it depends very much on where you are. I mean, from your perspective, how would you feel that the city is perhaps relative to the European experience with recycling and sustainability in the urban environment?
So Philadelphia is an interesting one. There's an enormous municipal and voluntary commitment towards sustainability, biodiversity, recycling, et cetera. We have our water department is one of the national leaders in using green infrastructure rather than built infrastructure to manage stormwater. Huge programs around creating green infrastructure, including one that we run that helps homeowners tear up paving, install rain barrels, et cetera. I think the basic challenge in Philadelphia is you're inheriting a legacy city that is 80% paved, right? And very, very dense, which is sustainable in one sense, but it's a challenging situation in which to begin to insert a green layer. And what we in the voluntary sector are really focused on is trying to do that. So planting urban trees, removing paving, turning vacant lots into community gardens and holding them from development permanently, improving public spaces, et cetera. So I think that we have great aspirations and great practice, and I think there are still many miles that we can go, but I think the aspiration here is widely shared by civic leadership that we want to take this legacy city that we've inherited and preserve and protect it, but also evolve it into the most sustainable, livable, and healthful environment that it can be.
Right, yes, and it's certainly I've always felt that the landscape architects, particularly as represented by ASLA, the American Society of Landscape Architects, have always been way ahead of British landscape architects on these issues, you know, particularly regarding water management. yeah, I think it really so much does depend on where you are. A couple of messages. Thank you very much. What an amazing collaborative approach. Yes, very inspiring, and I think it's extremely interesting to see and hear about this, and to know that this program has been running for such a long time. I think there is always a bit of a European stereotype that North Americans are actually not very good at these kind of public initiatives, but this I think is a fascinating example that I think a great many other cities around the world or communities could learn from. And we've got, yes, Joe Burns, Matt, I am speechless in admiration of your achievements. That's great, absolutely.
Thank you.
Excellent, good. Really impressive work you're doing. From James Golden, he's up in New Jersey, just over the border. Maybe even placing you in New Jersey. Great. Okay, so that brings us to the end, I think. Thank you very much, Matt. That was really very interesting indeed, and sort of answers a lot of my questions that have been sort of building up over the years about PHS. And hopefully before too long, I'll be back in the city, which I do very much like. We've got 2 more tea garden talks this week, and in these events we try to have all sorts of people in gardening. We have amateur gardeners, head gardeners, nursery people, researchers, and we have the occasional celeb, and I think we might be having one tomorrow, but I'm not allowed to say, and Annie will drop hints accordingly on social media. Also, I was having a chat with Pete Aldorf this morning about various things, and he actually offered to me, said, well, perhaps I could come and do something. And I said, oh, maybe, Pete, we've got a big, long list of people, we want to invite, but we'll try and squeeze you in somewhere. So I think we'll try and get Pete in at some point in June. Another message for you from Neil Johnson. The scope and quality of the work sounds like an incredible undertaking. The only thing I know of being close in the UK has been through organisations like Groundwork or British Trust for Conservation Volunteers. Yep, so thank you very much, Matt, and everybody. This, along with everything else we do, goes up as a recording on our YouTube channel, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and goodbye and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Be well. Thank you, Noel.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you.